from a very old friend of Christians Aware, Jenny from Christian Aid. And when I think of Jenny, I think of her coming to our conferences, coming to our summer school as a speaker, a resource person, and making a life for us all, not just what Christian Aid is doing, but what the people are doing around the world. The people of the developing world are working in a way we can learn from. And I think this is partly what Jenny will talk to us about now. And this is at the heart of Christians Aware's philosophy, of course, that we all have gifts and we all have needs. We all need to listen and we all need to learn from each other. The title of her presentation is Looking Towards a Hope-Filled Future. It is important that we have a positive approach to the crisis we face. Thank you. Thank you, Jenny.
Thank you, Barbara, and it's a great pleasure to be able to be with you all, even virtually, like other speakers. I was so looking forward to a weekend in Swanwick, but maybe next year, I've got slides to show. Am I allowed simply to share the screen? Will that work, or do I need to be promoted to host? Is that working? Can you see my?
Yes, yeah. We can see it, Jenny.
Oh, you can. Hey, sorry, I shouldn't sound surprised, but all of this presentation screen sharing was very much in hope rather than expectations. So that's a good basis for a talk on hope. What I would like to do for the next few minutes is to, as Barbara suggested, is to pick up on some of the themes that other speakers have talked about, and then bring in some examples from Christian Aid's programs and partners' experience around the world to show where hope is actually being brought, even in what seem like really, really bleak contexts. And it's been very encouraging to me as the final speaker of the afternoon to hear so much resonance from previous speakers of the sort of things that I'm going to be sharing with you. And it started with Bishop Don yesterday evening, and hearing from him about the convergence of crises, and other speakers have picked up on a diversity of crises that are affecting all or most or some of us around the world. And we've obviously got the climate crisis as a massive, major, overarching one. There are political crises, economic crises, cultural crises, when we're thinking perhaps of indigenous peoples and how economic priorities are just destroying their lives and ways of life. We've already been put on the spot very dramatically by a number of speakers when we're thinking about those crises and about our responsibility as Christians to take action and to take big action. So that's the overall context. As I say, I've got a number of examples, some relating to Christian Aid's partners' work on climate and environmental crisis, but a number from other crises and other major issues which are damaging and destroying the lives of so many people in the poorest parts of the world. And at the end of that, as well, I hope, is having encouraged you all that there is hope and that there are loads of things going on already, even in the bleakest of times, which give people hope. There are ways in which you all, to the extent that you are not already, can be bringers of hope. And I'll give you 2 or 3 things that Christian Aid would very much like you to get involved in, so you can contribute to this global movement of bringers of hope. which is expanding all the time and is tremendously exciting. So we've got this theme of an alternative world is possible, play your part. And the first example I'd like to mention is the debt cancellation campaign. And of course, debt has been a huge issue for millions and millions of people around the world for decades. It's become even more of an issue with the COVID crisis, because so many of the poorer countries in the world are in massive debt to World Bank, IMF, other governments, banks, and so on. And many of them are terrified about the implications if they stop paying that debt. So even though they desperately need the money to support their communities in the fight against COVID, you know, as a provision of medication, healthcare, PPE, food supplies, social safety nets, all the sort of things that actually in this country were almost taken for granted. Governments in many countries are saying actually the implications if we don't keep on paying the interest on our debts are so severe that we've really got to keep that going. And that's obviously a major, major problem for their populations. And so last October, Christian Aid worked with CAFOD to support church leaders from around the world to write to the IMF and the World Bank, the big financial institutions globally, to demand that they cancel the debt that is owed to them by the poorest countries in the world, so that that money can be freed up, at least during the pandemic, to enable support to the populations to try and bring the pandemic under control. And we had 170 church leaders, meaning not individual congregation leaders, but some of the major networks ecumenically and denominationally around the world, including Anglican Communion, World Council of Churches, ACT Alliance, some major Catholic and other networks. All of them were so enthusiastic about signing this letter and getting involved at this big political action level. And that gives me hope. Things like this take time to work through and to have an impact, but the fact that there's so much energy to act big within the churches is a very, very hopeful sign. And then, of course, we've been challenged very rightly and very profoundly and unsettlingly about how we and how the churches are reacting to the climate crisis. And here again, an alternative world is possible, but taking up David's challenge particularly, we have to act big. The COVID pandemic is an opportunity for the whole world to rethink, recalibrate, reset the way the world is. And that's big. But if we don't take this opportunity, we may never get such an obvious big opportunity to produce a zero carbon world, which is fair and just for everybody. And looking at the UK churches, there are two areas where there is hope. There is still a huge amount that they need to do, and David is right to challenge. But although many of them are starting with the small actions, they can build on those small actions, give confidence to do the bigger, really big political level stuff. In the last year, for instance, the Church of England, the Church of Scotland, the Scottish Episcopal Church have all voted to go carbon neutral by 2030, which is massively ambitious, but hugely encouraging and sends amazing signals to the government and to other institutions. And then we absolutely have to get use of and extraction of fossil fuels down to an absolute minimum fast if we're ever going to reach zero carbon, let alone within the necessary timescale. And more of the church denominations are actually engaging with this, and progress with most of them is far slower than one would wish, but there is hope that there is movement. And for instance, the Methodist Church have already committed to pull their investments out of fossil fuels if the relevant companies are not on track for the Paris commitments by a particular time. For the Methodists, that's this year. For the Church of England, it's 2023. The Church in Wales is going to vote on a recommendation to disinvest, and that happens in April. Quakers and United Reformed Church have already divested. The Vatican has endorsed divestment. So we've got this movement, and being church institutions, they will move slowly, but they are moving, and we need to encourage them. Something totally different, humanitarian disasters, also crises for millions of people. Now, this is a woman called Pauline who lives in Haiti, and she and her family lost everything in Hurricane Matthew. Christian Aid's partner there provided them with new shelter, which you can see, gave them a water filter, really necessary after a hurricane, and gave her a cash transfer. And so all of that together gave the family a chance of a new start, gave them hope. This was from the Time Is Now mass lobby of Parliament, which took place in June 2019, where we had 12,000 campaigners from all over the country came to Westminster to lobby their MPs to demand urgent action on climate change. And it's brilliant that so many people would prepare to travel from all over the country to meet their MP in person in the days when we could, and to explain why this is such a massively important, massively urgent issue. And that, again, it's a sign of a growing movement of people who want change, many of them Christians, people of other faiths. And that's a hope-bringing signal. This is a picture from Ethiopia. And Ethiopia, one of the many countries which is being really hammered by climate crisis already. And that's affecting the livelihoods of many, many, many people. One of our partners there has been training women in the production of aloe vera soap and giving them help in setting up and running businesses, because this is much more resilient to climate crises than the sort of work that they were supporting themselves with before. And storms and droughts, floods, all of which have a devastating impact on so many people. So helping women, and particular emphasis on women in this context, to develop the financial and personal resilience to get on with things, build their own futures. This is a scene from Cox's Bazar in Bangladesh, where hundreds and hundreds of thousands of Rohingya refugees are living. In that sort of situation, COVID is an ever-present and terrifying threat because of the numbers of people, the impossibility of physical distancing and so on, and the limited availability of soap, clean water and hand washing facilities. And so Christian Aid and the consortium we're working with there have been providing the residents of Cox's Bazar with hand washing facilities, soap and other things which will help reduce the risk of transmission, and that's giving people the hope of staying well in hugely challenging situation. And this is the Reverend Elenida Oliveira, who's a Brazilian priest who was the lead in setting up a women's refuge in a Brazilian city called Ariquemes. And they'd never had a women's refuge before, but as in every country in the world, including our own, gender-based violence, domestic abuse is a massive, serious, often hidden problem. And so this was radical stuff. Our partner, the Anglican Church in Brazil, led the provision of this refuge. And not only did they provide the refuge, which provided shelter and accommodation support for many, many women and children, but they also spent a lot of time raising awareness within the church itself. And that resulted in the church becoming a safe place in which domestic abuse could be talked about. And that is pretty radical in itself. And an unexpected but wonderful consequence of setting up the refuge was that the local police asked for training from the refuge staff in how to deal with complaints of domestic abuse when women came into the police. And so in that city, women now are confident that they will be sympathetically and appropriately supported if they make a formal complaint. And not only that, but the refuge now coordinates the city's policies on services relating to women, for instance, education, health, social services. So out of what would have been a wonderful project anyway of setting up a refuge, all these amazing broader benefits, the bigger action have been realised, and a lot of hope brought to an awful lot of women and children. Some of you who were at the Christians Aware conference a couple of years or so ago will have heard me talking about a Zimbabwean partner of Christian Aid called Padare. And I want to mention them again here. If it's not clear, the poster that the man is holding up says, "A 21st century man is not afraid of gender equality." And Padare was established 20 or 30 years ago now by a group of Zimbabwean men who realized that gender-based violence, domestic abuse, was an issue for them to address as well as for women to raise. And so they now have an amazing network right the way around the country of men who are going around teaching and mentoring other men on the subject and transforming attitudes, transforming mindsets, transforming the lives of many, many women and children. So I could go on until this evening with a lot of other examples of where Christian Aid's partners, Christian Aid supporters, campaigners are in very different contexts, at very different levels, transforming people's lives and bringing hope. And now I want to finish with 3 suggestions of ways in which all of us as individuals, maybe through our churches, can be bringers of hope. And to sort of relate back to the emphasis in other talks about action, big action as well as small action, turning hope into action. And the first of these is a global prayer chain. And we have worked with CAFOD and with Tearfund to establish what we hope, what is already a prayer chain around the world, with the intention that it goes on right the way through to the COP, the UN summit in Glasgow in November that's been mentioned previously. And the aspiration is that there will be at some point constant prayer going on somewhere around the world for the climate talks and for a world that is full of hope for everyone, for a world where everyone and the whole of creation can flourish. And if you're interested to join in individually, maybe with a church group or your entire church, there are details on the website there. And then we've already heard from a number of speakers the opportunity that the pandemic is providing to rethink the way the world works. And we've produced, and again, you can find on the website, some resources for discussion in church and other groups, enabling conversations about what we would like the world to look like, and then how we can make that possible, get involved in helping make that possible. And so do again look at the website. If you the picture, just for your information, is a group of Afghan men who are receiving from one of our partners food and hygiene packs and advice on how their communities can protect themselves from COVID. And then the other action, I talked earlier about the debt cancellation campaign, and again on the website there's an opportunity to email the Chancellor of the Exchequer to ask him to push for cancellation of debt, and much more ambitious than is being offered at the moment, so that the world's poorest countries stand a fighting chance of getting through the pandemic and emerging stronger the other side. And that is that. We're part Christian Aid partners, supporters, communities that we work with. We're part of a much, much bigger global movement, campaigning for a world that is full of hope. And it would be wonderful if you all were able to join us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jenny. How lovely to end on a note of hope, to end our afternoon on a note of hope. And not only that, but it depends on us all doing things. We can all listen and learn, and then we can act together. And acting together, we will have strength. And we can, as different organisations, we can join forces and join each other's campaigns at work. So thank you for such a positive and international presentation. We're most grateful, and there's much we will do. Thank you.